Okay, let's jump right in and talk about a single article from 1965 that didn't just predict the future, it actually gave us the blueprint for it. Take a look at this quote: "A home computer, automated cars, personal mobile communicators." I mean, that sounds like he's describing your smartphone, right? Except this was written way back when a single computer took up an entire room. So who was this guy? The author was Gordon E. Moore, who would later co-found Intel. And in this explainer, we're going to break down the original article that basically created a 50-year roadmap for the entire tech industry. To really get how incredible his foresight was, you have to kind of transport yourself back in time. This wasn't just some dry technical paper. It was a vision for how electronics were going to fundamentally change everything. So, let's set the scene. The space race is on. The Apollo program is proving that these brand new things called integrated circuits are reliable enough to literally go to the moon. But back here on Earth, computers are still these giant, expensive, room-sized machines. All right, now let's get to the heart of it. The observation that would eventually become the famous Moore's Law. And believe it or not, it all started with a surprisingly simple number. Moore was looking at how chips were being made in 1965, and he noticed a really interesting trend. The most cost-effective circuits, the point where you got the most bang for your buck, had about 50 components on them. He saw this super clear pattern. As manufacturers crammed more and more components onto a chip, the cost for each individual component just plummeted, but only up to a certain point. He realized this sweet spot, this perfect balance of complexity and cost, was doubling every single year. So based on this doubling trend, he made an incredibly audacious prediction. He just extrapolated 10 years into the future and calculated that by 1975, the most economical chip wouldn't have 50 components, but a staggering 65,000. I mean, just think about that leap in only one decade. It's wild. So what did Moore think this explosion in complexity was actually going to be good for? This is where the paper really shifts from observation to pure prophecy. And his predictions, well, they were just eerily accurate. He saw home computers coming, or at least terminals you could have at home. He imagined electronic controls in cars, personal communicators you could carry around, and get this, even electronic wristwatches. I mean, does any of this sound familiar? He was basically describing the core building blocks of our modern world: the laptop, the smart car, and the smartphone, all from the perspective of the mid-1960s. But here's the thing, Moore was an engineer, not just some dreamer. So he didn't just make these wild predictions, he actually identified the biggest engineering challenges and then explained exactly how they could be solved. Okay, the first and most obvious question was just about physical space, right? Could you actually fit that many components into such a tiny area? His answer was a very confident yes. He explained that the manufacturing techniques they already had were precise enough to do it. Packing 65,000 components into a tiny little square wasn't a barrier at all. It was totally feasible. All right, so you can fit them, but what about the heat? If you cram that much stuff together, wouldn't the chip just generate a ridiculous amount of heat and, melt itself? And this is where his practical genius just shines. He pointed out that because chips are basically flat, two-dimensional things, they have a huge amount of surface area compared to their volume. And that makes them surprisingly easy to cool. The heat can escape efficiently. So, this brings us to the most important point of all. Why would this relentless progress even happen? What was the real engine driving this incredible exponential growth? And this is the absolute key. Moore's Law wasn't about a law of physics. It was about economics. The entire industry, he argued, would get locked into this race to find that sweet spot, always pushing to make more complex chips for less money. This quote from his paper just says it all. Moore's Law isn't a law of nature. It's a law of economics. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy because the whole industry was driven by this relentless pursuit of lower costs and higher performance. And the impact of that was just profound. This single article, this observation of an economic trend, effectively set the metronome for the entire technology industry for more than half a century. It really did set a rhythm for everyone. The prediction in '65 led directly to the microprocessors of the '70s, which then fueled the internet age in the '90s and ultimately put the supercomputers we now just call smartphones into all of our pockets. In his closing statement, Moore made it really clear that this wasn't just about one little piece of the industry. This trend was going to define everything. And looking back, you can see that wasn't an exaggeration at all. It was just the simple truth of what was about to happen. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. For half a century, the industry had this predictable roadmap to follow. But today, as we start to bump up against the physical limits of silicon, that roadmap is kind of ending. So the big question for our generation is, what new economic and technological engine is going to drive the next 50 years of progress?